welcome everyone to this episode of Beyond the Crucible. I'm Gary Schneeberger, the co-host of the show, and you have clicked play on, we hope you've clicked subscribe to, a podcast that deals with crucible experiences, those things in our life that are traumas, tragedies, setbacks, failures, moments of discontent, things that knock the wind out of our sails, things that can take the breath from our lungs, things that do indeed change the trajectory of our lives. Layered onto that, though, for this episode and for the last couple of episodes that you've heard, we are in the midst of a special series that we've called Second Act Significance. And the idea behind that is the guests that we're featuring during this series are guests who had a life, had a career, had a way of living before and then a way of living after, where they changed something about their lives and they've poured themselves into something that brings them, aren't we creative, second act significance. That's why we called the series that. And all of this that I've just mentioned, from the Beyond the Crucible podcast to Crucible Leadership as a brand to this second act significance idea, the idea of a life of significance, all the brainchildren of the host of the program, my friend and the founder of Crucible Leadership, Warwick Fairfax. Warwick, great to be with you again.
Thanks, Gary, and very much looking forward to this.
This one has like some extra special meaning to me, and you'll find out why. I'll tell you why, listener, in just a second. But our guest today is Nancy Volpe Beringer, who founded her couture self-titled brand in 2016, specializing in one-of-a-kind wearable art. Nancy's award-winning designs use innovative textile manipulations, fabrications, and patterns. The entire Nancy Volpe Beringer line is designed and handmade with love in Rocky Balboa's hometown, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Since graduating at the top of her class at age 61 in 2016 with a record number of awards, Nancy is making her place in the fashion world as a Grammy red carpet designer and Best in Philly fashion designer for artsy dresses. That just sounds fun. She made history at age 64 as the quote-unquote oldest designer ever to be a contestant on Bravo's season 18 Project Runway. It's one of the reasons I'm so excited. Huge Project Runway fan. She rose to the top as runner-up, where she showed the most sustainable and accessible collection ever to walk in the Project Runway finale at New York Fashion Week. Nancy's goal to promote sustainability and to meet the needs of the disabled community with an adaptive line is taking hold. She recently launched the world's first ever accessible online luxury resale platform, The Vault, at volpeberinger.com. You'll get that website address. You don't have to write it down now. You'll get it later as well. The platform shows that fashion and function can coexist by offering customizable, adaptive options to fit the unique needs of a disabled person. This next part could have been written by one of the team at Crucible Leadership, is how tightly Nancy fits with what we're about. And she is continuing her mission to give back to her community by supporting organizations through her fashion. Nancy's personal goal is to inspire others to dare to hope, persevere, and dream, regardless of age. Warwick, I don't know where you're going to start because there's a lot of ground to cover here.
Wow. Well, firstly, Nancy, thank you so much. And I love kind of what you do with your two lines, the Nancy Volpe Beringer clothing line, the couture brand, and then the Vault by I think Volpe Beringer, just the adaptability for disabled. I mean, that's so inspiring. And we'll get to that kind of story in Project Runway and the choice you made that not everybody else did, that you would just felt a call to that. So it was so inspiring. And also, really, it's inspiring that you began this journey in your late 50s. And it's now in your 60s as somebody that's also over 60 and just had my book Crucible Leadership come out last October 2021, it's easy to think, gosh, it feels a little late. Like, couldn't have happened 20 years ago or something. So I'm just so impressed by your example. So I'd like to kind of go back a bit before you launched into your just incredible vision, your fashion vision. I know life wasn't exactly easy, and at one point you were a single mom with 2 small kids. So just as a backdrop, tell us a bit about your life growing up. I mean, it sounds like you had enjoyed sewing and just different things. So there was there's part of the origin story of Nancy Volpe Beringer as you grew up and things you enjoyed. So just tell us a bit about that.
Well, it seems like I've been following this roadmap, not knowing where my destination was supposed to take me. But it began, actually, I think that my childhood crucible moment could be when I took a sewing class. And the only reason I did that was because my mother kicked us out of the house. There were too many of us and we had to go to summer school. So I took a sewing class and I loved to sew. Instead of weeding the yard, had to do all the sewing projects in the house. So that started it. But it wasn't nurtured as a potential career. So it was just something I did because I enjoyed, and we didn't have extra clothes. I didn't go out. You didn't go shopping in my household for clothes, but I got to make some clothes. So it was there, it was planted, but then life took over and it became just being practical, surviving, doing what you needed to do to survive, not so much what you wanted to do, because I never really thought in those terms. It was just how to survive, I guess, and be independent. So very practical. I had a very practical approach to life.
You know, I'm guessing people of, our age, we're both over 60. Obviously, I grew up pretty differently in Australia in a very wealthy background, so that had its own, you could do anything you wanted to so long as it was a family business. So, there wasn't much talk of dreams and aspirations and all that. But I think in many families, my wife is from the U.S., so somewhat familiar. This notion that parents or friends or teachers would say, well, Nancy, what do you love? What's your dreams? How can we encourage you? It wasn't culturally what people did. Most families, I'm assuming yours was like many, well, Nancy, you got to be practical, okay? Assuming you're not going to go down the, homemaker route, which again, 50s, 60s, beyond, obviously life was very different. But even so, there was a sense of you got to be practical. So was there that sense that, did you ever think about doing fashion, or did that really not come up in the conversation? If it did, was it like, well, that's fine, Nancy, but, come on, let's get a real job kind of thing? How did all that happen?
What's really interesting is I kind of marched to my own feet right from the get-go, because my 2 older sisters went off to college. And that was actually groundbreaking for my oldest sister, because that was something new as a female going off to college. I was the one who said, no, I don't want to go to school. I immediately got a job. I was very shy, but I was also very determined. And I got a job right out of high school, saved for a year. And then, where all my friends were in school, I went and got an apartment by myself. And so it was, I think, driven more. It wasn't even, that what do you want to do? I took my own path. So I was very independent, thinking, a risk taker, not knowing it. But but for me, it was practical.
So it was much driven by your internal desire to be practical, to be independent. It wasn't so much people lecturing you. It was just at that time, that's kind of the path you chose.
I wanted to be on my own.
Yeah.
And that being said, Nancy, one of the things you told me when we talked before we were recording here, you said that you'd always been creative. And you said even with spreadsheets and even in business plans, and that you never knew why. And that's part of all of that has kind of come together, right?
That is so key, because my one sister was an art teacher. So in your mind, you think, well, they're the artist.
Right.
that makes sense. I thought I'm a business person. I liked being organized, more of a business brain, but I always was creating and I didn't understand the need. So I would be creating, again, I love creating spreadsheets. I love creating business plans, leadership programs. The crazier, the better. It got to a point in my careers where people would, if they saw me coming down the hall, they'd hide because it's like, what is she up to now? So it's like, don't get me involved, but they did. So I just have always had to create in so many small scale to large scale. It was my oxygen, but I didn't know, I didn't identify it. It just came from within. And as long as I was creating, it seemed I was satisfied.
So here you are. You left home. You have an apartment, and you begin in the work world. So talk about those early years and frankly the next decades through the 50s, because there's a whole story there until you had a major shift. So tell us about those years as you're finding your way in life.
So in my 20s, again, I became independent. I got my apartment, but I also got married young. And by the end of my 20s, I was divorced, a single parent, unexpectedly from my viewpoint. And at the time, it was with a 2 and a 4-year-old. And again, I had no college degree because that wasn't in my plan. But then I was like, all right, now I need to support my children, but also be a parent. And how can I do that? And I had two sisters that were teachers. I thought, oh, I'll become a teacher because I'll have the time to do both. Well, that was quite interesting. So at, I guess, around 30, I went and got my bachelor's degree in business education. And I did it in 3 years because I was going to run out of total money. And I just had to do it. So I did it in 3 years. But the plan kind of backfired because as a teacher, I wasn't making enough money. And I found myself working 2, 3, 4, one time even 5 jobs, bringing in enough income. So it really didn't pan out the way I thought, but it took me to the next step. Like, so it was always connecting, and you didn't understand why the one challenge took me to another completely new place. And I always loved doing things I didn't know how to do. Again, that was like intriguing to me. When I took the teaching job, it was a one-person department in a VOTech school, business technology, with the oldest outdated thing, but the challenge was to do something with it. And so I've always loved to do that. And so from teaching, then I became an advocate for teachers and school employees and worked for the Education Association, where I really had spent most of my career. There's always this kind of path, challenge, a bump in the road, something happened, and then I just took a dive and went into a new place. But again, always being able to create.
So you're working, from what I understand, in the New Jersey Educational Association. Is that like an administrative group, or is that?
So it's the biggest teachers union, school employees union.
Right. Okay, so
So
you're
you're
advocating.
advocating,
Okay, you're
right?
advocating for teachers, and you're in administration in there, which probably you've reached a point where you probably could support your family. And did you feel like you had at least somewhat of a sane life, like you could, not be 24/7 because any job you can do that, or was it pretty difficult to get to sane?
No. So when I started there, it was actually, I applied for a job I didn't get, but then they called me back and there was a temporary one, and it was in communications, public relations, editor of a paper. I had never taken a journalism course. I never took a journalism course. I did it. My very first article I wrote, it looked like a business report versus a story. But I learned, I asked questions, and then I became a speechwriter, and then I became a media spokesperson. I just did. So I was always I did leadership development. But then when I got to the managerial level, which from the outside looking in that is like golden. Like there's
Yeah.
not many spots. And that's when it was like, I'm financially, in a great place. I have, my future looks good, but always working crazy hours. I mean, always working crazy hours. One thing I think was very significant, I thought as a hardworking parent, single parent, I was being a role model for my children. but I would have like people coming into my house. We'd have long meetings. I mean, I've always worked, 60, 80, 100-hour weeks. That's just, what I've done. And I can remember my son in high school, we're talking about college, and he wasn't sure if he wanted to go to college. And having not gone till I was in my early 30s, I said, but it opens doors. I said, look at me. And by getting my degree, what I've been able to do. Now, just picture this. There's a knife slowly coming to me into my heart because, and I can get emotional thinking about this. I remember my son looking at me and saying, but Mom, you're always working. Why would I want to be like you?
Oh,
And here I thought I was such a, ideal role model. And I didn't have the balance. It killed me almost. But
oh,
I needed to hear it. And it was an important lesson. And we just come at life. But that was, again, that's generational also.
well, absolutely. I mean, it's easy to judge in hindsight, but as you were growing up, that was normal. You work hard, you get ahead because you think you're doing your best for your family, and you can only know what you know based on the upbringing you have. It's easy to look back, but you did the best you can. So not to dwell on it too much, but how did you handle that with your son? Because that would feel like a dagger to the heart. There's no question. How did you handle that?
I don't know exactly, but I must have been successful because he ended up going to school.
Okay.
And so I guess however strategy I did, I also remember at a point, because he was a musician and he was at Berklee College of Music, and at a point he was thinking like, why am I even here? Maybe I should just come home and drop out. And so again, I found the letter I wrote to him because we didn't do emails, and I wrote a letter and I said, well, that would be great. I mean, if that's what you need to do, because again, I didn't go to school right away. If that's what you need to do, take a break. That's great. I would love another adult person in the house to help. Like, I'm
Right.
on my own. I would love somebody to help with the
Right.
cooking and cleaning and
Yeah.
the shop. That would be awesome. Never, he stayed in school.
That was a very smart, strategic letter. Yeah, I have a couple adult sons and a daughter, and yeah, that would something for the adult sons. That would be very effective. So, very smart strategy. But so here you are. I mean, you're doing well, and beneath the success and the Teachers Association, you are showing incredible creativity. Life is obvious. Looked backwards, whether not just spreadsheets, but meetings and how we do things, how we be more efficient. And but probably you weren't thinking, oh, look how creative I am. Yeah, and it's interesting you have one son that's likes music. Clearly there's a lot of creative genes in there, like it or not, right?
Well, I knew I thrived, and I knew I was, at that point, I recognized that I was creative. I mean, I was put, in addition to my full-time job at the association, I was put in charge of our 150th anniversary of the organization 5 years before it happened. And I had to put all these teams together. We had to create, our building was being demolished because of asbestos. So we had to protect our archives. So it was a lot of archival saving things, but it was also discovering our history. And it culminated in a gala event where I collaborated with the Trenton Symphony. I hired a theatrical production. We wrote an original play. I had an event where there were like 8 different dining places going on with music from every era. I mean, I learned how to seat a theater. I learned to do so much, and it was awesome.
So,
But then when that went away, things started to just trickle down. So yeah, that was great. It was a 5-year project, very
right,
successful.
right.
But I still like doing just a basic spreadsheet is just as much too.
Amazing. So as we shift here to kind of the, I guess, second act, if you will, for your life, you've got all these creative things bubbling around. And I don't know, maybe a bit like lava beneath the surface, maybe you had a couple little mini volcanoes or, geysers or whatever. It started poking through the crusty surface, be practical. And in your 50s, maybe they became strong enough that you began to seriously consider a shift. So talk about, you're in this great job. I believe your boss said, hey, this is a job for life. You'll have retirement. It's the kind of job, if you're practical, you never leave that kind of job. Job security, there's always going to be teachers. They're always going to need advocates. That's not going to go away. So talk about how that shift began to happen to, really leads to where you are now. How did that happen?
So I achieved what I thought was my dream job and became a director of the group that I used to work in. It was almost immediate. I thought I could make a difference, and it wasn't happening. There were just so many roadblocks. So not only was I having trouble breathing because my creativity was being stifled, it was also my effectiveness. I've always thought I needed to make a difference in life, and I was not able to do that. And it was like within months. I mean, it just happened. It was the volcano erupted, and I started losing sleep, and I just knew I was in a bad place.
So what happened next? So these volcanoes are going off. You're not feeling fulfilled in your job. Sometimes, further up the chain is not always good. There's more bureaucracy, politics. It doesn't matter what the organization is, there's always roadblocks and issues and challenges, and it's just the nature of human beings and bureaucracy. So that's happening. And so what did you begin to consider? What was all those little volcanoes going off? Where was that heading you?
Well, this is where I guess I would say it was my most major crucible moment. And it was 3 a.m. because I know exactly, because I wasn't sleeping. It's 3 a.m. and I'm thinking of my sons. The one is in finance, president of a company, very successful. The other, the musician, had graduated at a recording studio, but he wasn't making money. So he's teaching himself additional skills, photography, videography, all online. And believe it or not, I started thinking about what he was doing. It sounded so exciting, and I got jealous. I got jealous of my own son. And this is the moment my life changed. I dared to ask myself, if I was young again, what would I want to be learning? Hypothetical question. The amazing thing was the answer came immediately to me, immediately, and it was fashion design. Don't ask me where it came. It came immediately. So I'm still not sleeping, and I start researching programs, and I'm going in to see what schools, what's available, and then I see interior design. I'm like, well, maybe I should do that at my age. And then I went, no, Nancy, you're just dreaming. This is practical to stay where you're at. This isn't about being practical. This is about a fantasy if you were young. Well, I start researching it. By the next week, I was in New York touring 2 of the top fashion schools, and signed up for a drawing class because I did not know how to illustrate, but I started taking it the day of the one tour. And the last one I took happened to be in my backyard in Philadelphia, but it was always there. And once I answered it, there was no going back. And I walked away and resigned. And I remember the executive director said, have you always wanted to do this? And I went, I never even dared to dream. Again, I was always being very successful, but doing what was needed in my life and for others. But once I opened the door and peeked in, I had to go through it.
And so when you went through it, what was that door? What door did you go through?
So the good news is maybe because of just the way my practical life, I've always been very fiscally conservative. So that very first job out of high school, making, just over $100 a week, I took a savings bond out of every paycheck so that I could get my apartment after a year. So I was always saving. When I went to work for the Education Association, even though it was temporary, I enrolled in the pension system. I didn't take vacation days. I didn't take sick days. So I had a little nest egg, so that it's easy to say, oh, I followed my dream and became a fashion designer. Well, it's because of all those decades before I had the opportunity, and I took my life savings and I enrolled in a 3-year master's program at Drexel University.
And one of the things that you said about that, Nancy, that I thought really speaks to how serious you were taking this, even though, as you say, it's a fantasy. The other school was like a 1-year program, right? It was Parsons, which is very associated with Project Runway. And you just knew intuitively that you weren't going to get to learn, get your hands really in the fabric, as it were. You weren't going to get to learn quite as much in a year as you could learn in a 3-year program. So you went for the more expensive, more in-depth program. Why did you make that choice?
Well, fortunately, so fortunately, when I found the 1-year program at Parsons, again, one of the, sometimes the top school in the country, I also went to FIT. I had been just recently married, and I was so excited because, again, I'm very goal oriented. And I remember sitting at a bar and having dinner, and I said to my husband, I said, "Oh my God, I found the program. It's 1 year. I can get my associate's degree in 1 year. I'm going to become a fashion designer." And he goes, he's got a lot of nicknames for me. He goes, "Calm down, Fireball." He says, "I thought you're doing this for the love of learning. Why are
Mm,
you rushing the learning?"
mm.
Thank you, Ted, because without hearing those words, I would have been at Parsons, and 1-year program would not have been enough. But then I joke with him because then I enrolled in the 3-year program, and he lost his wife, who was then doing 80-hour, 100-hour school week. And you could see Drexel outside our window where we were renting an apartment. And I'm like, so yeah, but I have such a, supportive team behind me.
So I wanted you to dwell on this shift a bit because here you are. So how old were you when you started at Drexel?
I think I just was 58,
I mean
58.
that's astonishing. I'd say there's not that many people at that age. They would say, you know what, maybe I think of fashion, maybe something else, but it's too late. I'm too old. I missed my chance, and that's just life. I mean, many would say that, but yet I love what you said earlier. That you said something like, you don't think you'd ever asked, you never really dared to dream. I know you said earlier, like a TED talk, follow your dream, make fear your friend, which we'll get to the fear part, which is fascinating. But you never really asked yourself, what does Nancy really want to do? It's sort of an irrelevant question. Well, what's the practical thing to do? I've got to get a job, and then later on, I got to support two kids. I can't afford to be crazy. I've got to feed them. I mean, I've got to build a life for them. So, but you came to a point in which you dared to dream. You dared to say, well, and a lot of us think, well, my dreams don't matter. It's all about serving others. I mean, you serve a lot of people, but you can serve others out of the dream you have within. It's not either or. But often they think, okay, my life, my needs don't matter. It's all about my kids, all about my husband, all about my wife, or all about my employees, and I just want to be faithful, and my dreams and desires are irrelevant. It's almost like I don't matter, or at least my dreams don't matter. But you made that shift. I mean, many don't. So for those that may be listening, how can you make that shift to saying, actually, I do matter. My dreams do deserve to be treasured. I mean, how did you make that shift? Because I think it's stunning.
That's a great question. I always felt something was lacking. Like I didn't always, I just knew there was another life in me. I didn't understand it, but it was there. But I never, again, allowed myself to think about it. I mean, I was very successful. I was, achieved a lot. I mean, people again would look at it and think of how successful, but there was still something deep inside that I knew was not being, there's a fire, but it just wasn't allowed to take off, little. And I remember my friends saying, well, you need a lot of little fires, before the big one happens. I don't know I can't remember the words, but I think it really was when I started at Drexel. It was, you would think I'd feel so out of place, so out of place, but I felt like home. I found my home. I felt like I found where this journey was supposed to take me. And my very first class was an art class. Why I almost didn't even try to do it, because I'm still not a great illustrator, but I figured out a way to get through the program. And I got there early because I didn't even get the tour of the school. And I remember a student walking in, and I'm sitting on the one stool, and there's a platform in the middle, and he sits on the other side because of course I'm the teacher, right? And then the next one comes in, sits next to him. So I pick up my things and I go and I sit with them, right? I forgot that I looked different, because that's how much I felt like I was where I belonged. And it took a while, but I brought so much with me. I brought so much life experience with me. And I think it served me so well, because again, when you talk about fear, I had nothing to fear in my designing, because I knew there were so many more important things than whether or not I made the right cut or, designed something and had to redo it.
Right.
Go ahead.
I want to jump in just for a second. Maybe we're going to say the same thing, Warwick. Because this is a series on second act significance, what Nancy just described is the power of the second act. I felt like I was at home. I felt like all of these things that she didn't know where they were leading when she sort of felt the tug took her to the second act. And it's different for everybody what that second act is, but clearly this is the first half of what we're talking about here in this series, second act significance. You've arrived or are en route to arriving at your second act, and the significance then comes from that. Sorry, Warwick, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
All good, all good. Nancy, what you're saying is, I think, so profound, and I want listeners to really hear what you're saying, because sometimes I believe, I'm a sort of person of faith, so I feel like there's a divine plan up there, and whatever spiritual paradigm we happen to follow. And I just sort of feel like you may not have been ready until you were, in your late 50s to go to Drexel. At that point, you truly had no fear. Your kids were probably settled by then. You'd achieved a lot in your career. It's like, what's the worst that can happen? Okay, I'm going to fail. I'll find something to do. Fear of failure often looms much bigger for some in their 20s than in their 50s. So I know for me, I didn't get my book published until, I was over 60, but I couldn't have written that book when the company, after the $2.25 billion takeover, after that went, under in my early 30s, I wasn't ready. I just couldn't have done it. Now I talk about my failure and it's not that hard. I mean, it's not like nothing, but I wasn't ready. So sometimes, if there's some creator up there, and, one day we'll find out, but I think there is, but sometimes do you look back and say, maybe I wasn't ready. Maybe the universe or some plan, maybe this served me because I was ready to go full throttle. Would I have been at a younger age? I don't know, but I was certainly ready in my late 50s. Does that kind of make sense? Sometimes life happens for a reason, if you believe in any kind of, I don't know what, karma, divine plan or whatever, if that makes sense.
Warwick, absolutely. I would not have been ready, and I would not have been the designer that I am now. And again, it didn't make sense. It makes total sense now. And what's really funny is, I guess we'll get into Project Runway, how a reality TV show was such a driving force to take me on this path and to guide me there, almost pushing me, which is just kind of ludicrous to think that. But I really believe in the energy of the universe and the power of the universe. And from when I first watched the first episode, something happened, and the universe was taking me somewhere.
So let's talk about that. Let's talk about Project Runway. I I must say, I'm not that fashion conscious myself, so I haven't watched it. My wife funnily enough, is an interior designer, at least we had kids and life got a bit busy, but she does have that kind of sense. It's funny, I kind of kid her. She'll just put something on in the morning, and I kid her saying, "There we go, sort of effortless chic." So it's like she just does it with it like breathing. Not that she's trying to impress anybody. It's not like a Project Runway deal, but she just understands colors and how things look just naturally because she's a creative interior designer type. But anyway, all that being said, so tell us how Project Runway happened. You obviously were following it for a number of years. You're in Drexel, and then you decided, you know what, I'm going to go for it. Talk about that, because that's all. I mean, it's one thing to go to fashion school. That's incredible. But Project Runway, oh my gosh, how did that happen? How did you get that idea, and what happened?
And I know how it happened. At age, I think I was just about to turn 50, was the first season. I remember watching it with my mother. And I remember watching and said, if I had studied fashion and took my love of sewing as a child, I could be on this show. I just fell in love with this show. And I said, and why I would think that, I'm 50 years old, I'm thinking that I could have been on that show. But it was there. It got planted in this crazy brain of mine. Fast forward, I have this job. I'm also getting more into fashion. Again, having grown up 12 years wearing a school uniform and just making my things, I was apparently in my professional life, I was considered fashionable. But it wasn't until I started thrifting and consigning that I got to really explore good fashion and high fashion and got to appreciate it. So these were all, again, little steps. And so as soon as I went into Drexel, I went, now I can be on Project Runway. Now I'm 57, 58. Oh, now I can be on Project Runway. Didn't tell a soul, like nobody knew about this fantasy of mine. So and some people, again, it's a reality TV show, in the fashion industry, it's, there's a mixed review. I graduate. Now I'm 61. I'm going to be on Project Runway. I'm like, I better apply. I'm getting there. So I apply right away without the experience. But I knew because of my age. And the first go around, I actually got an interview and I made it through a couple of the stages. Fortunately, I didn't get on. I made it to like the semifinals. And where some people would have thought that as a failure, that just motivated me. And there was almost a relief. I'm like, this is great. I've got a year now to prepare. I took a very intense online draping class out of Paris. I signed up for couture courses. I went over to London for 2 weeks and took at Central St. Martin's, the top fashion school in the world, and I took an intensive class. I started training like an athlete. And during that time, I spent 2 years in physical therapy because while at school, I developed arthritis in my neck. And so I wake up every day in pain, but the being active actually helps me through the day. So I started training as an athlete to get back on. And I knew, like, there was something that said, I am going to be on Project Runway. Makes no sense, but there was something there. And I remember the first time when I had to do a video, and I called my son up. I got a videographer son. This is going to be great, right? I'm going to have a cool video. And I said, I have a favor. I need to make a video. When I told him what it was for, he begged me not to go on. He said, please, Mom, don't do it. And there were two reasons. One, who wants their mother on a reality TV? And the other one is he has watched and witnessed the pain as a survivor of adult bullying. And he has seen me in pain having been bullied, and he didn't want to subject me to that because it's a cruel world out in the social media. And he was trying to protect me. Did I listen to him? No, I just got a friend to do my video.
Well, sometimes people give you good advice. Sometimes they give you advice because they really love and care for you. And sometimes it's good to listen, and sometimes you need to know when not to listen. Thank you so much for your input. I love you, but I'm going to go for it anyway. So, that's okay. So I want to, just since you touch on it, because there may be others that have been, gone through adult bullying. Without getting into necessarily details, talk a little bit about that and how you overcame that in your case.
So adult bullying, or also known as adult passive aggressive bullying, is so prevalent. And it could be in our personal lives, in the workplace. And I don't even think people realize that they probably have witnessed it and even been part of it, not knowing it. And one of the things, as a survivor, I've done a lot of research when I was trying to work through it, was there's no innocent bystanders in bullying. And with adult passive aggressive bullying, it's, if I go through this checklist, you'll say, oh, well, that's not a big deal. I've gone through that. I've gone through that. But when you're a victim, it hurts and it's painful. And it could seem like such simple little things, but you have a group, you go out for a drink and they talk about a colleague and they start bad mouthing that person. Well, if you just sit and listen, you're part of it. That's bullying. It's passive aggressive. It's bullying. If you walk into a room and say hi to everybody except that one person, that's bullying. If you try to sabotage somebody's work, that's bullying. Even a little thing, hiding things in a meeting. So I've been bullied through abusive relationships, but also in the workplace. And and at school. So I took the approach in the workplace. It's like, well, people will never believe what somebody's saying about me. If they know me, well, I found out if you don't speak up, that's the only truth or non-truth that's out there. Your story's not out there, and that's it. People believe the bully, or they're afraid to. They don't want to become the target of the bully. At Drexel, I was bullied, and having now done research, one of the things I learned was you'll hear people say, "Oh, that person has a problem. It's their problem. Just ignore them." Well, when you go home and you're in tears and in pain, you can't ignore that. So this is years of me allowing this. And then you start thinking there's something wrong with you. Like, why is it happening again? So now it's not, is it me? You start doubting yourself. Like, why am I getting bullied again? There must be something wrong with me. And it wasn't until I confronted one of my bullies, and I've since been able to do that, that I became a survivor instead of a victim, and felt liberated. It's a work in progress, though. Trust me, it's not something that's one and done.
Yeah, no, thank you. I mean, obviously we could have a whole podcast on this, but thank you for sharing that, because, you could make some snarky comment, whether it's at Drexel, somebody could say, oh, there goes Nancy, it should have been 20 minutes, but of course Nancy's going to make it 40 minutes because, if ever somebody can make something long-winded and boring, it's probably Nancy. And then they say, oh, just kidding. Well, you feel very wounded by the just kidding kind of thing.
Yeah.
People do those kind of things all the time. And yeah, I think, look, I'm not an expert on this, but conceptually, confronting it, and when you obviously it helps if you don't yell and scream about it. Find a way to do it when you're calm. Which can take a bit of work, prayer, or meditation, and just confront the person. They might say, "Look, what's your problem? Nancy's got a thin skin." Hey, I'm kidding. Whatever. But the fact you've confronted them is a win, is a victory. You can't control. It's like apologies. We talk about forgiveness a lot here. You don't forgive necessarily because the person deserves it. You forgive because you're worth it, and that's a whole nother related but different. But anyway, so you're a survivor. You're not going to just sit there and take it. You confront it, you deal with it, which empowers you, and it helps to then it takes a sting out of it. It's easy to let it go, if that makes sense. So I want to make sure we get your story here, because it's definitely. I'm curious about what you were just talking about, but so Project Runway, the second time, you almost on an athletic level of research, and on Project Runway, you got pretty much all the way. I think runner-up, I think, was it on the? But during that Project Runway, I feel like you found your calling. Call it divine calling from karma, the universe. So tell listeners how you picked up something that other people didn't want. You know, it's like, oh, I don't want this. But you said, yes. What was that? What was your yes to?
So when I went to Project Runway, I mean, I actually was shot up like twice in the arm because, I had nerve, I had rotator cuff things. So I was like, I didn't know how long I would survive. And every challenge, I got there and I felt blessed. I mean, when I got on the runway, it was just like and I could have been gone home. I looked around and I just took it in. And I felt blessed that I had made it. But once I was there and I'm like, okay, you made it. Well, guess what? You're not ready to go home yet. And I just stayed so focused on not worrying about other people, but just what I could do. So one of the challenges, it's called client challenges, and they bring outside people. Well, for our client challenge, there was Olympiads and Paralympiads. And they come down the runway and there is Tatiana McFadden, a Paralympiad in a wheelchair. She is the world's fastest female marathoner success story in the world. There's actually a federal law, Tatiana's Law. And I saw her and I jumped out of my seat and I started to pull that energy of the universe, looking, and like, I need to get her. This is why I'm on Project Runway. Like, I knew it, that moment, I knew it. And I asked her, I said, did you see me? I must have looked like a crazy woman just staring at her. And they were randomly pulling names out. And when I got her, I screamed of joy. I'm reliving that. And I know some of my other designers were probably this is my problem as a competitor. I call them the other designers. They were competitors, right? We were competing, but the other designers, they were probably relieved not to have to deal with that. But I knew enough from my little experience at Drexel, studying a little bit about adaptive design, that I had to approach this differently. So you have 30 minutes to sketch the look. Well, I knew I had to split it not only in the aesthetics, but functionality. So I was asking her function, and this is a one-day challenge, and they knew what they wanted. They had plenty of time to prepare, and this was supposed to be for the Tokyo Olympics, red carpet kind of look. She wanted a train. She wanted this. She had so many things, and I'm like, great. And at that point, Project Runway did not exist. I was there to fulfill Tatiana's fantasy, not only aesthetically, but function-wise. And that's what I did. And it changed my life.
I have co-hosted 110 episodes-ish of this show. And Nancy, that story that you just told is the first time, and I still have them, it's the first time I got chills. To hear you tell that story on the heels of everything that you've talked to or about up till then, I'm still, it still has physically moved me to hear you talk about that, because it's not just you finding your second act, you finding all the answers to all those questions you had since you were a little girl who was sewing, but you poured it in to helping other people. And I can hear in your voice, hopefully listeners, you can hear in Nancy's voice, just how moved she was by that experience. And I'm going to let Warwick talk because I'm still moved by it myself.
No, it's excellently well said, Gary. I mean, you had ever since you were young, just this, there were embers there waiting to burst into a forest fire for fashion. But here you connected fashion to, I would say, a God-given calling, a universe-given calling to empower, those who are not as fortunate, those with disabilities, those who may be marginalized in society. So you've got your creative fashion talents and desires, and you found a way to help people. And while other people might have said, phew, I'm glad it wasn't me, you were like leaping for joy. And I love what you said. It wasn't about, oh, gee, if I do a good job with this Paralympian, this will put me on the map and it'll help my business get to the next level. That was the furthest thought from your mind. I can help this woman, is what you were thinking. I can help this Paralympic athlete. I can help her feel better about herself and empower her. And you were doing it for all the right reasons, which I think is just is just wonderful. I mean, does that kind of make sense? I mean, I want listeners to hear your motivation. It wasn't about fame and success. It was to help that person.
I'm just reliving it. I'm getting very emotional. Because it was such a defining moment. Fashion can be really powerful. It's not just about clothes. And I think because so many times in my life, I didn't feel like I fit in, having been bullied, feeling damaged, or just who knows what has driven me. And I didn't know, understand why I had this need to be a relevant designer. Even at Drexel, people always ask me, what are you going to do when you graduate? I think it's because, like, what's this old person doing here? Is this a hard program? And my gift was not to answer the question because I was goal-oriented. I said, I just want to be relevant. There's got to be a reason why this 61-year-old person gets to be a fashion designer. It can't be about making more clothes. There's got to be a reason I'm doing it. And it was that moment on Project Runway. It was like, yes, this is it. Understanding that fashion is powerful and everybody should have the ability to express themselves and their individuality and get empowered or feel beautiful from the inside outside. And if fashion's the way they do it, why do they not get that opportunity? I can remember talking to one of the judges after Project Runway with another thing I did. And she said, oh, even on Project Runway and what you're doing now, you're a decade ahead. You're the future, you're a decade ahead. And I went, and all of a sudden I used to think, oh, that would be great to be called the future of fashion. And I'm like, no, I don't want to be the future of fashion. I want to be the now of fashion. Why should the disabled or anybody with a medical issue or with a different type body have to wait for the future? Why can't it be now? And that's what happened, and it impacted my finale collection. It impacted when I finished the show, even during the pandemic. It's really my compass of what I need and should be doing.
You know, what you're saying there, Nancy, to me is the true life of significance. It's not about power, fame. It's not about, oh, you can be the future of fashion. You think, it's almost like I could care less. I'm focused on helping and empowering these people, you know? I mean, you know, not to get too religious here, but certainly, you know, Jesus talks about, you know, caring for the least of these, the despised, the marginalized. I'm sure in other religions, you know, there's that kind of thought is you were motivated to care for people that others maybe don't care about. It was all about helping people. If that brings you awards, that's fine. That's okay. But it wasn't about, oh, Nancy Volpe, Beringer is the future of fashion. It's like, okay, whatever. It's like, I wouldn't say it's meaningless, but it's like a drop in the bucket compared to helping that Paralympian and other people who, you know, people may, you know, look down upon. So I think that's, to me, what a true life of significance is. It's using every creative talent that you were born with in service of a greater good. And to me, as we've said on this podcast and elsewhere, everybody wants joy and fulfillment. Everybody on the planet. Well, how do I get it? Well, it doesn't come from being a narcissist and just getting rich for the sake of it, because you will not be happy and joyful. Every psychologist on the planet will tell you it doesn't work. The only way to be joyful and fulfilled is to do what you're doing. Doesn't mean everybody has to be in fashion design, but conceptually, you're using your creative talents in service of others that you feel a universal God-given calling to help. And so that gives you, I'm sure, joy and fulfillment. Not to put words in your mouth, it's probably hard to describe. Is that a fair description of you, if you don't mind me putting it that way?
No, that's perfect. I mean, it does bring me joy and fulfillment. And again, that's, you want to be happy. I can remember always saying, why is life so hard? Why is life so hard? It just seemed like life was so hard. Even when you're being successful, it's hard. And even though I was working the 80 hours, 100 hours in pain every day, life wasn't hard. Life was being fulfilled. But I also believe within me is that, again, I don't know what happens later and all that. but I just feel like you need to leave this universe, this planet, your life, having done something to help others, to just have some mark left that you made a difference, even if it's in a few lives beyond your immediate, family for me. And where I always knew there was something else in me that was unfulfilled, that's where this has taken me. Like, I know as much as I'm having so many roadblocks, and again, the pandemic has impacted all of us. I mean, Thursday, March 12th was the finale on the air. I was supposed to go to, and where I got to celebrate. I was on top of the world. I was going to go to Nova Scotia for an adaptive, a festival. I had this. I did a lot of charity work, all this stuff. I have not seen a client or created a new thing with a client in over 2 years. I do a lot of caretaking for some high-risk people in my family, and so safety has been first. So all that went away where I thought I was going to be. It disappeared. But then other doors opened up. I had other tragedies. I was displaced. There was a fire where I was living and had my studio. We were all displaced. I had nowhere to go. And right in the middle of the pandemic, there was a premature, my granddaughter was born. I became in this tightest little safety pod. But all this happened again for a reason. And as silly as it seems, like if you really allow yourself to look beyond and be open, be open. So here's the fire. I have my little team of a couple people in trash bags, putting all my designs, all my clothes, personal things in trash bags, getting it out of this building. Over a 1 week, we had 5 days, one freight elevator, no electricity. And I found a rental. I was fortunate that I could do that. And it had all these entrances so we could all be safe. But now I have like a garage filled with everything and it's a mess. And then what happened was I went, oh my word, I have too much stuff. I have like too much stuff. Look at all these clothes I have from all this thrifting and consigning. What am I going to do with all this? And then because I wasn't making money through fashion with the pandemic, I thought, well, I'm going to sell my personal clothes and designs. They're amazing, to raise money to create an adaptive line for the disabled. And one morning I woke up and I said, why are you waiting? I started researching and I decided I wasn't going to sell it elsewhere. I tried to do my own platform. I started researching, and nowhere in the world that I can find, and which is really hard in fashion, is there a resale. And again, this is luxury items that care and will adapt the items for the disabled as part of just the service. And that's fire. And having all these clothes and everything stuffed in bags and unpacking, saying I have too much stuff, I'm going to sell it to raise money. That's opened up this whole world of the vault, and trying to really advocate, and that's where I'm at. I'm starting at the bottom. It's rough because I can't go to, I don't go to events yet. I'm very isolated in some ways, but I just had this great opportunity. I just named a finalist for a brand new retail concept for Fashion Group International, where they've honored top designers. So things might happen, but again, it was what somebody thought a challenge, a tragedy, a fire. And then I moved in the new place and I've had 2 tornadoes. I've had a hurricane. I've had a collapsed ceiling in here that just keeps coming, but it's okay. That's all okay. And I don't know why, but I can keep smiling and laughing.
What's remarkable about what you're saying is you're turning setbacks into blessings for others. I mean, that's taking creativity almost to the ultimate level. That really is creative thinking. And because, who knew the pandemic was going to happen? And I get it, when you've got loved ones at risk, you've got to be extremely careful. I mean, I get it. I'm here with my mother-in-law in Florida. She's like 90, and yeah, you've got to be very careful. But I mean, you have a really remarkable story of hope and meaning, and you live in the moment. You love fashion, but you're using fashion to empower and help people. And it seems like you've had setbacks in the recent years, but you can still smile. That's remarkable. Rather than, oh, woe is me, I was on the cusp of, I don't know what, but okay, stuff happens. What can we do with it? You can still smiling. So I think, I don't know, your attitude is really remarkable. I think we can all learn from your creativity, your adaptability, if I can misuse that word, if you don't mind. You are very adaptable in your thinking and your ability to turn tragedy into triumph, if you will.
You just stole my line that I wrote down. You can see it here. It's on the bottom right there. An adaptive, how wonderful that someone who works in adaptive fashion has lived an adaptive life. I've been waiting for 15 minutes to say that, and you took it.
Sorry about that.
Good for you.
Sorry.
No, that right there says just how inspirational you are, Nancy. And this is the time in the show where I would normally say something like, the captain's turned on the fasten seatbelt sign and we've begun our descent. We got to land the plane. But instead, in honor of Project Runway, I'm going to say that sound you just heard was Tim Gunn saying, "Make it work." So we're at a point where we're going to wrap up here in a minute. But I want to say one thing before I let you tell listeners how they can find out more about your work and about you. I've said this a lot on the show, which is always a blessing. I've asked listeners to go back and watch the video on YouTube so they can see the guest smile even as they are talking about some truly difficult crucibles. And I thought I was going to say that about you, but they don't have to go watch it on video because they can hear it in your voice. Your smile comes through your voice as you're describing really tough things that have happened to you. You're smiling because I think you're in that second act of significance, and it puts the other stuff in perspective. It didn't happen to you, it happened for you, and you've leveraged that to help other people. So I would be remiss if I did not say this. So how can people find out more about you and your collections, Nancy?
So, well, there's a couple different ways. I'm on Instagram. It's the Vault by Volpe Beringer, and also Nancy Volpe Beringer. And I also have matching websites. My original designs are on nancyvolpeberinger.com or the Vault by volpeberinger.com. There's also channeled into Facebook. You can contact me, email me the same way. And I do have to tell you, as much as my son feared social media has been my blessing through the pandemic. And so I welcome anyone to reach out. I get such inspirational messages from around the world. I answer every one of them, and they have kept the smile when the days you don't want to get out of bed and it just feels too hard. People connect with me, and I so appreciate it.
As a guy whose last name is Schneeberger, let me make sure that listeners know how exactly to spell your name. So when they go www. Spell it out for them so they can get you.
Okay, so it's Nancy Volpe, V as in Victor, Olpe Beringer, Beringer. And again, it's the Vault by Volpe Beringer.
Fantastic. Warwick, I don't know how you're going to find just one last question. It's your show. You can ask 5 last questions if you want, but it's back to you.
Yeah, it's all good. Well, Nancy, thank you so much. I mean, what's really inspiring, everything you're doing is inspiring. I mean, you have this comment, follow your dreams, make fear your friend. You have, I think, another site I saw, the Age 59 site, celebrating stories of people who are 59 and over. So for those who might feel like, life's passed me by, it's too late, talk about, why they should think differently, whether they're in their 40s, 50s, 60s, heck, 70s or 80s, who knows, whatever the age is. What's the message of hope that you would give them, sort of along the lines of follow your dreams, make fear your friend? What's a message of hope for those who feel like, I'm too old, second act's never going to happen to me, it's just, I need to stuff those dreams deep, deep down and not let them out? What's a message of hope for people like that?
Well, I think one key thing is to surround yourself with positive people, believers, people who believe in you. again, when my one son discouraged me from doing it, he's out of the picture. I surrounded myself with people who believed me. He believes in me now. He's all there. But to follow these dreams, and they can be small. It's surround yourself with positive people. Being positive, especially in the world we live in, is extremely difficult. And I would say that's key. And the fearlessness. Again, when Elaine Welteroth, the judge, was promoting the show for our season, and she was talking about this senior person on the show, she said she's fearless. Somebody says, she said, makes fear your friend. And I didn't realize I did that all along. When I was that little 11, 12-year-old signing up for the sewing class, the other class I signed up for as an extremely shy person was a public speaking class. Huh? What? Makes no sense. That was a fear. So I've always challenged myself, and where I have been afraid, it hasn't stopped me. So it's okay to feel the fear, but don't let it stop you. And again, surround yourself with positivity, even if it's just from yourself. Even if you don't have other people, write down words of positivity. Believe in yourself. When you stop believing in yourself, that's where it's hard to keep going.
I've been in the communications business long enough to know when the final word on the subject has been spoken. And Nancy, you just spoke it. Listeners, thank you for spending this time with us on Beyond the Crucible. We know, we discussed it here, how difficult crucibles can be, how painful they can be. We also know the power. We've heard the power. I felt the power of Nancy's second act significance. It is never too late to start a second act. And she is inspiring, rejoicing proof and evidence of that. Not just to have a second act, but to have it be truly, deeply, movingly, meaningfully significant. So until the next time we are together, do remember that your crucible experiences are not the end of your story. In fact, they can be the beginning of a new story if you learn the lessons from them and apply them moving forward. And the reason why that's true is that where you will be taken as you learn the lessons of your crucibles and move forward is to a place that you may not even know what it is at the moment. Nancy didn't know where her place was going to be when she felt the tug to go, to move, to change. But where it's led her and where it can lead you is to a life of significance.